and daughter regarded each other warily, each more than a little insecure with the other. He made a movement toward her, and then recalled the circumstances of their last conversation in that study. She saw his purpose, and his doubt, hesitated also, and then went to him, took his coat lapels, and kissed him on the cheek. "Ah, Vee," he said, "that's better," and kissed her back rather clumsily. "We're going to be sensible." She disengaged herself from him and went out of the room with a grave, preoccupied expression. £15! And she wanted 40. Part 4. It was, perhaps, the natural consequence of a long and tiring and exciting day that Ann Veronica should pass a broken and distressful night, a night in which the noble and self-subduing resolutions of Canongate displayed themselves for the first time in an atmosphere of almost lurid dismay. Her father's peculiar stiffness of soul presented itself now as something altogether left out of the calculations upon which her plans were based, and, in particular, she had not anticipated the difficulty she would find in borrowing the £40 she needed for Ramage. That had taken her by surprise, and her tired wits had failed her. She was to have £15 and no more. She knew that to expect more now was like anticipating a gold mine in the garden. The chance had gone. It became suddenly glaringly apparent to her that it was impossible to return £15 or any sum less than £20 to Ramage. Absolutely impossible. She realized that with a pang of disgust and horror. Already she had sent him £20, and never written to explain to him why it was she had not sent it back sharply directly he returned it. She ought to have written at once and told him exactly what had happened. Now if she sent £15, the suggestion that she had spent a £5 note in the meanwhile would be irresistible. No, that was impossible. She would just have to keep the £15 until she could make it 20. That might happen on her birthday, in August. She turned about and was persecuted by visions, half memories, half dreams of Ramage. He became ugly and monstrous, dunning her, threatening her, assailing her. "Confound sex from first to last," said Ann Veronica. "Why can't we propagate by sexless spores, as the ferns do? We restrict each other, we badger each other. Friendship is poisoned and buried under it. I must pay off that £40. I must." For a time there seemed no comfort for her even in Capes. She was to see Capes to-morrow, but now, in this state of misery she had achieved, she felt assured he would turn his back upon her, take no notice of her at all. And if he didn't, what was the good of seeing him? "I wish he was a woman," she said. "Then I could make him my friend. I want him as my friend. I want to talk to him and go about with him. Just go about with him." She was silent for a time with her nose on the pillow, and that brought her to. "What's the good of pretending? I love him," she said aloud to the dim forms of her room, and repeated it, and went on to imagine herself doing acts of tragically dog-like devotion to the biologist, who, for the purposes of the drama, remained entirely unconscious of and indifferent to her proceedings. At last some anodyne formed itself from these exercises, and, with eyelashes wet with such feeble tears as only 3 o'clock in the morning pathos can distill, she fell asleep. Part 5. Pursuant to some altogether private calculations, she did not go up to the Imperial College until after midday, and she found the laboratory deserted, even as she desired. She went to the table under the end window at which she had been accustomed to work, and found it swept and garnished with full bottles of reagents. Everything was very neat. It had evidently been straightened up and kept for her. She put down the sketch-book and apparatus she had brought with her, pulled out her stool, and sat down. As she did so the preparation-room door opened behind her. She heard it open, but as she felt unable to look round in a careless manner, she pretended not to hear it. Then Capes' footsteps approached. She turned with an effort. "I expected you this morning," he said. "I saw they knocked off your fetters yesterday." "I think it is very good of me to come this afternoon." I began to be afraid you might not come at all." "Afraid?" "Yes. I'm glad you're back for all sorts of reasons." He spoke a little nervously. "Among other things, you know, I didn't understand that you were so keenly interested in this suffrage question. I have it on my conscience that I offended you." "Offended me? When?" "I've been haunted by the memory of you. I was rude and stupid. We were talking about the suffrage, and I rather scoffed." "You weren't rude," she said. "I didn't know you were so keen on this suffrage business." "Nor I. You haven't had it on your mind all this time." "I have rather. I felt somehow I'd hurt you." "You didn't. I hurt myself." "I mean?" "I behaved like an idiot, that's all. My nerves were in rags. I was worried. We're the hysterical animal, Mr. Capes. I got myself locked up to cool off, by a sort of instinct, as a dog eats grass. I'm right again now." "Because your nerves were exposed, that was no excuse for my touching them. I ought to have seen—" "It doesn't matter a rap if you're not disposed to resent the way I behaved." "I resent?" "I was only sorry I'd been so stupid." "Well, I take it we're straight again," said Capes with a note of relief, and assumed an easier position on the edge of her table. "But if you weren't keen on the suffrage business, why on earth did you go to prison?" Ann Veronica reflected. "It was a phase," she said. He smiled. "It's a new phase in the life history," he remarked. "Everybody seems to have it now. Everybody who's going to develop into a woman." "There's Miss Garvice." "She's coming on," said Capes. "And you know, you're altering us all. I'm shaken. The campaign's a success." He met her questioning eye and repeated, "Oh, it IS a success. A man is so apt to take women a little too lightly, unless they remind him now and then not to. You did." "Then I didn't waste my time in prison altogether." "It wasn't the prison impressed me, but I liked the things you said here. I felt suddenly I understood you, as an intelligent person, if you'll forgive my saying that, and implying what goes with it. There's something puppyish in a man's usual attitude to women. That is what I've had on my conscience. I don't think we're altogether to blame if we don't take some of your lot seriously. Some of your sex, I mean. But we smirk a little, I'm afraid, habitually when we talk to you. We smirk, and we're a bit furtive." He paused, with his eyes studying her gravely. "You, anyhow, don't deserve it," he said. Their colloquy was ended abruptly by the apparition of Miss Klegg at the further door. When she saw Ann Veronica, she stood for a moment as if entranced, and then advanced with outstretched hands. "Veronique!" she cried with a rising intonation, though never before had she called Ann Veronica anything but Miss Stanley, and seized her and squeezed her and kissed her with profound emotion. "To think that you were going to do it, and never said a word! You are a little thin, but except for that you look better than ever. Was it very horrible? I tried to get into the police court, but the crowd was ever so much too big, push as I would. I mean to go to prison directly the session is over," said Miss Klegg. "Wild horses! Not if they have all the mounted police in London, shan't keep me out." Part 6. Capes lit things wonderfully for Ann Veronica all that afternoon. He was so friendly, so palpably interested in her and glad to have her back with him. Tea in the laboratory was a sort of suffragette reception. Miss Garvice assumed a quality of neutrality, professed herself almost won over by Ann Veronica's example, and the Scotchman decided that if women had a distinctive sphere, it was at any rate an enlarging sphere, and no one who believed in the doctrine of evolution could logically deny the vote to women ultimately, however much they might be disposed to doubt the advisability of its immediate concession. It was a refusal of expediency, he said, and not an absolute refusal. The youth with his hair like Russell cleared his throat, and said irrelevantly that he knew a man